before we get off of this topic, is there a situation where the Republicans have a great House map this year, but lose these statewide races? Like, is there a situation where they flip either the 7th or the 8th or both, and then they say, tough luck with the 2 statewide seats, or those two horses tethered together here?
It's absolutely a scenario, but I never bought into, let's go back to August and all the stories we read about Oz, how Oz was toast. I never bought into that. Thought it was nonsense. Refused to cover it because the reality is that a candidate like Fetterman, he's not, he may say that he's going to those traditionally Trump counties throughout the state, but those voters are not voting for Fetterman. Fetterman's base is where I am, in Radnor Township in suburban Philadelphia. It's not in the rural counties, however much he thinks he may be able to successfully engage them and play to the negative messaging that may work among working class voters who are struggling. They're not inclined to vote for a guy like Fetterman. And the reason, Alex, is because the crime crisis, a concern that is topping polls, the crime crisis isn't limited to Philadelphia or Pittsburgh. It's a crisis in Williamsport, Hazleton, Allentown, and Reading, and all the small cities throughout the state where you have voters who were Democrat, but would never imagine voting Democrat, let's say again, considering the past few years. And that's why you're seeing dramatic voter registration margins that are playing to Republicans' favor statewide. So just based on that alone, the fact that Democrats now just have about a 500,000 voter registration advantage back to where it was in 2000 suggests to me that a candidate like Oz could absolutely squeeze through and survive this race. Mastriano has a bigger challenge, but the congressional races are competitive, especially in Lehigh Valley. Jim Bognet and Matt Cartwright. I mean, Bognet could absolutely pull it off. It's the most competitive race there in memory. But of course, he has to confront the reality that Scranton is a militantly Democratic area. And it's one of the, besides Philadelphia, I would say culturally, that's the most loyal Democratic voter base in the state outside Philadelphia.
What is the Democratic base in Pennsylvania this cycle? I mean, I was, again, as an outsider, surprised to hear that Fetterman is sort of striking out in rural and exurban Pennsylvania. So maybe you could just dwell a little bit on what the Democratic base is going to look like this year, in your opinion.
The Democratic base is comprised of, let's start with the city of Philadelphia or Pittsburgh. You have millennial, Gen Z, young professionals living in these cities who are increasingly inclined to vote. And then you enter the suburbs and you have professionals entering middle age who are either registered independent and vote Democrat or are in fact registered Democrat. And I think an important thing to know, Alex, is our idea of prosperous suburbia, yes, which is really the base of the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania. That is not limited to Greater Philadelphia and Greater Pittsburgh. So South Central Pennsylvania, for example, the Harrisburg, East Shore, and West Shore, the suburbs of the capital city, they are exploding in growth. They're driven by eds and meds. Cumberland County, which is the western suburb, let's say, of Harrisburg, the West Shore of the Susquehanna River, that is the most prosperous county in the state outside of Chester. What makes this site, up until recently, even in 2016, Pat Toomey was able to pull off what was a competitive race against Katie McGinty. He was able to win re-election that year, in part because he won Chester County, outperformed Trump in what was a historically Republican area, but now is solidly blue. Chester County is not coming back. That is a Democratic county. But so the base of the Democratic Party, well-to-do suburbanites living in eds and meds communities in small cities and towns where the healthcare system is the primary employer. And with I say the two major exceptions besides Pittsburgh and Philadelphia would be Erie, where you have a strong working class Democratic base, and Scranton, where you have the Democratic Party is almost an economic engine there. I mean, people work at you don't get a job at a local law firm in Scranton unless you're a Democrat. I think that's the best way to put it. It's a very parochial Democratic scene. So you still have communities like that. But besides those hyper-local cultural factors, in Pennsylvania, it's really vast suburbia where that's trending blue and continuing to trend blue. And that, of course, can create challenges for the Republican Party in places where they had a lock for decades, if not forever.
Right. Okay, well, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop recording this. So sorry to those of you out there who are not part of the club.